Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Ecoffee with Experts. I'm your host, Matt Fraser. And on the show today with me, I have a very special guest, Tory Gray. Tory is the CEO and Principal SEO consultant of the Gray Company, a full-service senior-level SEO consulting company specializing in digital strategy, tech solutions, and tech solutions headquartered in Toronto, Ontario, forgive me, with offices in Atlanta, Georgia. She has over 13 years of expertise in SEO and growth strategy, and she holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in mass communication, public relations from the University of South Florida. Excuse me. When not wearing her SEO hat, Tory enjoys spending time with family, watching X-Files reruns, attending live theater, and playing trimanos, which I have. Trimanos. Mm-hmm. Forgive me for saying that wrong. Anyway,
Thank
Tory,
you for
it's a
having
pleasure.
me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on the show. So, I wanted to talk today about like keyword research and keyword research foundation, specifically to dominate the SERPs. Because, it's amazing. I was telling you off camera how I started doing this in 2006. And, keyword research back then was simply a matter of using Market Samurai, which is no longer even in existence. To do keyword research and it is absolutely amazing at how much keyword research has changed, B, how much more, correct me if I'm wrong, sophisticated. I was going to use the word difficult, but sophisticated it's become.
It's so much more nuanced.
Yes. It's so amazing. So so what are your thoughts? On the importance of keyword research for effective SEO.
Mm-hmm. Starting there, goodness, it's absolutely critical to getting it right. And you certainly run across people that just accidentally do SEO well. And what they do well is know how to talk to their audience and speak to their needs. So what they're doing is they don't need a data set to know their customers to talk that language. So they're doing that sort of accidentally without doing the keyword research. But that's why they succeed. They're creating content that meets a real need for a real human, and they're searching for those answers. So keyword research, is really, really critical especially to amplifying your results. Or if you're new to certainly a category and you're trying to learn about how do you speak to this audience, it's that much more critical. It's a data set that can help you understand what people are looking for, when and why, and you can dig in to really make sure that your program is set up for success. Certainly, if you're actively engaging on SEO and you're not doing keyword research, you're definitely doing something wrong. Like it's the foundation of understanding what are we doing,
isn't it? Yeah, it's like building a house. Like if you don't have a blueprint, you can't go and build a house.
It's the baseline of your strategy. Like what do you want visibility for, and why? What audience does that align to? How do you create resources that meet that need? And kind of connecting the dots across all of those pieces is really what you're looking to do.
Absolutely. So how have you seen it change over the years? I just alluded to Market Samurai and so
Market Samurai. I'm remembering SpyFu, which is obviously still around, but that used, it was a big one back then, and it was just such an interesting path. And they were always much shorter, more like 2-3 word phrases. Even worse than the keyword research was the optimization, because you were just, how many times could you repeat this keyword just ad infinitum? And it was a horrible world. And I'm glad we've moved away from that model, because nobody won in that scenario. It was not quality content. So thank God we have moved past that. Today, I think it's a lot more nuanced, and there's a lot more competition today. So there's a lot more work to stay ahead of the noise and to stand out. And of course, Google has changed how they define quality over the years dramatically. There was the day 10, 15 years ago where just more pages meant quality. And then that led to duplicate content, because you could just copy all your competitors' pages and put them on your site, and suddenly you had a big site. So because of that moving finish line of quality, I think we've all gotten better at understanding how to meet needs. I think user search behavior itself has also evolved. People are training Google at the same time as Google is training people on how to search and how to search more effectively. So between voice search and all these other mechanisms of how, e-commerce searching works and what people look for. They don't explicitly have to look for buy Nikes, right?
Yeah.
That used to be such an important keyword, like buy online or buy X, in order to rank for that. Whereas now there's often an implied version of what that means. So the new, I'd say, trends that didn't used to exist were maybe like the zero volume keyword research, a much stronger focus on user intent and how to meet that and understand what they're looking for. And so wrapped up in that is hidden intent.
I want to talk about those things.
Yes.
Anyway, I don't want to interrupt you. I'm just making a mental note.
Well, yes. I mean, we'll get into it, but those are, I'd say, the bigger updates. Keyword clustering, I'd say, is also a new trend, relatively. That's been around for a year or two.
Yeah.
But it's getting more pervasive, and it's happening more often in a good way, for more people doing more thoughtful planning. And I'm seeing a bit of an evolution from the stark, like, head terms versus the long tail, like, you have to do this, it's everything. People are having more of a cohesive view across the customer funnel and speaking to people all along the way.
The customer
especially
journey.
in the SaaS space, right? Like, you've had to get good at that over time. So, there's always somewhere to start, but there's less of this is the only playbook, and a lot more nuance in terms of understanding your competitive landscape and developing a plan to reach the right audience, the right people, right time.
Yeah. So let's talk about that then. Like, in regards to search intent and user intent, I mean, you made mention that, absolutely. It used to be like, buy Nike shoes, buy red Jordans or purple Air Jordans. And it's like, there are certain, the point I'm trying to get at, there are certain informational searches and transactional searches and buyer intent searches. And when doing keyword research, how do you navigate that in today's marketplace in figuring out, what those words are and how to segment them in the customer journey to then create content that matches those searches?
Yeah. It's an evolving understanding, right? Because people evolve and people's needs are changing all the time. So one of the most concrete things you can do to kick off, if you're just not sure, is Google it and see what happens. Because Google has a lot of data, go figure, about what people are looking for, because they're attempting to deliver them the right solution. So if you're really not sure about an audience or about a keyword, and if that's the right fit for you, literally Google it and see what else comes up. What sorts of results, what sorts of format is Google showing? What kinds of questions are they answering? What are the people also ask questions that are variations or ways? I don't remember who said this, but someone pointed out that it's perhaps a way for Google to disambiguate a broader query. So if you search for something broad, and then what are the next steps? What do you mean by those words that you say? Because it's not always obvious when you look for this, that what you really mean is this. So an example there, I'm going to steal this from Bernard from ClearScope, which is a great tool. So he gave an example of understanding user intent, which is for the query, I think it was around bone broth. So I think it was how to make bone broth. Or what is bone broth, rather. That was the query. So if you Googled what is bone broth, if you just take that sentence on its face, what you're going to hear is, okay, they want a definition of what bone broth is, right? But if you actually Google that statement, you'll find a variety of things. There's actual recipes. There are definitions, but then there's recipe variations. People also want to understand the benefits of bone broth. So when you Google a phrase like, what is bone broth, you'll see there's actually many different layers to what people are looking for, because people can be looking for more than one thing. And also different people have different needs. So looking at those search results can help you understand what is Google's most up-to-date version of understanding what that means.
That's pretty.
A caveat to that, though, is sometimes there's just not content out there answering that question. So Google can't deliver it. So the caveat that I bring here is, if you know your audience, if you're in touch with your customers and you know that they're asking questions, and when you Google that, no one's answering that question, but this is the word that your customers are using. And this comes into the kind of either the zero search volume or the hidden search volume. Sometimes they go together. Taking a chance on creating something, even though the data isn't necessarily there to show that that need is there. If you know your customers, I'd encourage you to create that content anyway and just try. So my example here of me doing this is I get questions from clients. So we tend to work with clients with budgets. They have their bigger brands. They might have more than one brand. They might have more than one product line that they want to focus on. So a semi-common question I get is like, for this X new brand we want to introduce, or this existing brand, we want to feature it. We want to specialize it. Should I make it a microsite? Should I split it out into its own brand with its own domain? And so what do I do with that? So I know people are asking this question. And so we're talking about a multi-domain SEO strategy. When would you want to do that? Right. So exactly. When I went to write this post, because a lot of our content frankly comes from, okay, well, I answered this question from a client 3 times. Okay, it's a trend. We're going to turn it into a blog post. Or I see it asked a lot in, say, like Slack communities. People are asking this question and I have this answer. And maybe now I have this email that I can repurpose into a blog post, right?
That's golden.
So we would have this concept, and I went and I did this research, and everyone was answering how to set up multiple domains, how you'd split it apart. Everyone was covering the how. Nobody was covering the why. The why. Nobody was discussing why would you want to do this and why would you not want to do this. So you can determine if you want to have this play. Do you want a different domain? Is this a useful thing, or is it better to keep it consolidated together? So I created a post about multiple domain SEO where I'm discussing, here's the scenarios in which it makes sense to split that out into separate pieces versus here's times when I recommend keeping it together. Because again, that's the conversation I keep having with clients. So within 2 weeks, we were on page 1. Because that's an example of the hidden intent. People were looking for this information, but it wasn't out there yet. And so Google couldn't deliver it. So if you know your customers, I would say, don't let the data limit you. Data is data. It's useful. It can be helping you, maximize an opportunity. If it's there, answer it, but also make strategic bets about what you think might be there that the data is not yet caught up with. You need to make a strategic play.
So in other words, it's so smart what you're saying. In other words, like, don't just go with the data. And so many people want to go with the high traffic, highly competitive keywords. Yet here's and I've heard from other marketers that, there may be a low volume, low search, low competition keyword, or even the zero intent, that if you know what your customers are and you know what your customer journey is, that could be worth, especially if you know what the lifetime value of a customer. I mean, some of these could be millions of dollars. Like
lifetime value, your average value, if you're talking SaaS. If you're talking big ticket items. So if you're selling cars, I don't care how niche it is. I don't care if someone searches for it twice a month and that's it. If that means the difference between a sale and not a sale, that's worth it. So, I mean, there's certainly business models where if you're selling, I don't know, like trash cans for $10 a pop, then maybe it doesn't make sense unless there's scale. But there are plenty of situations where you're either the lifetime customer value or the average order value is enough to make up for that. Or certainly like the ongoing sort of subscription model for the SaaS world, where this will always be there. So it'll just continue to deliver, again, lifetime value. But
absolutely. And you mentioned resources like Slack channels and emails and questions from customers. I mean, I guess in a business to tie this, their biggest asset is probably their customer service team.
Customer service and sales is a hugely under leveraged part of the business. I mean, especially on SEO teams, because SEO content came about and then we had all this data. So we wanted to create all this content, but everyone can do that. And now everyone's gotten over the hump, not everyone, but lots of companies. And now they have their junior copywriter who's in-house and is just trying to spin up new variations. They see people are looking for this. And so they create a version of this, of what's already out there. And the problem with that is that it's recycled. There's not inherently unique value because they might not understand the business that well and what are the nuances that the customers have. And they might not understand the nuances of that customer need and how to fulfill that, or their unique pain points. What pain is that person experiencing that your product can help solve? If you're just looking out there in the competition of the world, that's the problem with competition research from my perspective, is everyone seems to look at it to see, how do I replicate what they did? When that's not the goal. The goal is to see what they did, to see what you want to do differently and better. So you're looking for gaps in what they're doing. You're not looking to just spin up a new version of what they have, because if you do that, all you're going to do is end up in position page 2, exactly. You're going to be lower on page 1. And that assumes there's only one person that's doing this well, right? Like if you want to rank highly, you have to bring something new to the table. So that sort of old model of SEO departments being mostly a bunch of junior copywriters and then someone doing optimization and then just pumping out content used to work really effectively, but it's creating noise and more competition, and it's not helping you stand out in ways that it used to. Certainly bigger, more established brands can get away with that a lot more than smaller brands that you're introducing new to the market. And as we spoke about prior to the call, the rise of AI driven content, now we can just spin up a new version of this is just a new way to write a new word for a variation of what you already said. But again, it doesn't bring net new value. So what you can do is go back to the basics, go back to classic marketing, understanding your customer. What are their needs and how do you meet them? What are their pain points and how do you resolve them? Or how can you showcase how your product will meet that need and resolve that pain so it's worth their money to buy your product or service?
That makes so much sense, because so many people are just trying to echo an echo chamber.
And you can't stand out, and it's impossible. So I think a model of really more like senior people who understand, like subject matter experts who are maybe like editors, might be the model for the future, that they can really curate. These are the topics that we want to cover, and this is the unique. Because you want the basics covered as well, but you also have to have unique value. So as the next step for how I see things evolving, that seems like the way.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Like how would, you see that gap? How do you find topics that are different, but not already there, that are better? I mean, it's a huge process. And so it does take someone experienced, doesn't it?
It does. You need to have insights, or you need to be willing to do the work of talking to your customer service teams. You can actually do, you can do customer surveys. You can talk to your live customers. I mean, like, God forbid, you can talk to your customers. Did you know that?
You can call them and talk to them.
It's amazing. But so you can take your SEO data set, but you can also talk to your sales teams. They know what closes the deal, and they know what they want to emphasize and what they don't, if they're actively selling the product, right? If you have product market fit anyway. Your customer service team, we're talking like pre-sales and post-sales. So your customer service team knows, like, where were they happy with that and where were they not? How do we create content to support those needs? How can we answer those common questions? If there's a misunderstanding about how something works, how do we clarify that? They understand what those pain points are. And because they tend to be numerous, I keep repeating this because it's important. Like, what about this use case? What about this use case? And you can speak to that and make it very specific. We just released this week, actually, a process around how to do allegedly zero volume keyword research. And the basics are talk to your sales team, talk to your customer service teams,
come
up with your ideas. If you have account managers, certainly they're talking to your customers so they can see these repeat patterns. You can go to Reddit. You can look for trends that people are asking this question, and these are the variations. Slack communities are a great place for that as well. There's lots of sources for inspiration. Then you can go to your data to attempt to find validation. But the tools might not show any volume. But if you see that question asked often enough, especially like in the B2B space, or like when you're localizing for internationalization. So especially if you've got a country with multiple languages, then you're bifurcating the volume. So everything looks artificially smaller than it is, and there might not be volume, or it might be like that 0 to 10 range. Those are great topics because typically there's a lot more volume than tools would lead you to believe.
It's interesting. Tools don't really, I don't know when, like, I've never seen a tool anymore that really gives you search volume. Like, maybe I'm missing the boat. I mean,
they're there, but they're so, all of our data sources are what people are willing to share with us, or they're modeling and using machine learning and AI to understand what it is. So that's the SEMrush and the Hrefs. So they're making assumptions about what Google is, but the Google Keyword Tool Planner used to tell us stuff. Now it's pretty obfuscated. Google Search Console is probably your best source of data, but it's also what Google's willing to give you. I mean, I think Hrefs just put out a study that's over 50% of you just don't see what they are. You have these clicks, you have these impressions, but you just don't know what they're associated with because Google's only willing to give you so much data. They don't want to, they're not really incentivized to. And yet in these niche use cases that we're talking about, like in the B2B space, where inherently you're talking to a smaller audience because it's not business to consumer and there's just a lot more consumers, right? It's a smaller pool of people. It's harder to quantify those things. And so I see more volume regularly in Google Search Console for the particular keywords that I'm going after than I would see in Ahrefs or in SEMrush or whatever your keyword tool of choice is.
What do you think about, like, for instance, Google, I don't know. What are your thoughts on Google locking down and using, the whole keyword not provided? And they said that it was because of secure search and SSL and privacy and so on and so forth. And I think it's because topic. But I think they wanted to limit SEOs from being able to, so that more money would be spent on advertising, as you say, make it more ambiguous. Now, I could be out to lunch. I'm just stating my opinion.
I mean, Google's a corporation,
to make money.
They're here to make money. They're looking out for their bottom line. They could use the excuse of privacy, but they were willing to sell that data. I mean, and when was not provided taken away?
Wow, you just made such a great point. They were wanting to protect it, but they're willing to sell it. It's like, that's so hypocritical. But it's so true.
But now they're starting to take that away from paid search advertisers too, because the next frontier at this point, like it used to be, you can't get it for organic, but you can pay to get that access in paid search tools. But now, over time, they're limiting your ability to do match types, and they're changing the definitions of what match types are. And then they don't tell you what all the keyword queries are because they want you to spend more money. Like there are not enough people in the world, literally, for there to be more internet users, for there to be more companies, for there to be spending more on AdWords or ads. They change it every 2 to 5 years, right? But so, like, there's not enough of them for them to continue to grow as a company. So they have to have these creative means. So at first the finish line was, okay, well, now they have to buy these keywords, so they'll come here to buy them. And now that's the only limited source. So they know, like, this is monopolistic power in action. Really. Like, now they have this, and now everyone's stuck there. And if they are now starting to take that away because now there's no other source, so they can take it away from you there too. I mean, yes, you have third-party tools, but they're modeling based on what they think Google's doing. Like,
so parking on the topic of keyword research then and tools, like, are there, besides the obviously we just mentioned SEMrush and Ahrefs or whatever they call it, and the defunct tool that I mentioned, Market Samurai. Is there any other tools or processes
Certainly.
that you use?
So Also Asked is a good one. So they're a tool that's leveraging the People Also Ask technology.
Yeah. So
it can find the variations of those. So rather than you going and doing that manually and clicking all the buttons, because when you click a People Also Ask thing, like 3 new questions pop up. And if you click this one, then 3 new variations of that pop up. It'll go like 3 levels deep. And if you can get X many searches for free per month, but then if you pay for it, then you can get that 3-level deep, and you can just export it to your Also document. So that one's useful. Mm-hmm. I think it's Answer the Public. So it might Ask the Public. I think it's Answer the Public. I always
Answer the Public. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very similar tool. It's been around longer. I
Neil
think
Patel
they just sold to Neil Patel. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're using the autocomplete functionality in order to assume those. So I like to use those. I also like to use those sort of side by side and then see, okay, if I'm looking for something, how many are the results accurate? If what I'm looking for aligns to, okay, these questions make sense. This is the right subject matter. It's not, sometimes something with the same name can overlap. So is it accurate? How many variations are there? And can I see patterns across the tools? So is it asked over here? And it's also asked over here. So you're looking for like breadth and depth, right, of patterns in and across keywords to say like, okay, I think even though my tool tells me there's no searches for this, or there's only 0 to 10 searches for this, I can find this in Also Ask. I can find this in Answer the Public. There's lots of variation. Chances are there's a lot more volume there than you think.
Yeah. Plus, as you said, if your customers are asking it as well, and if it's being asked in Slack,
that's your best source
in Facebook groups, and if it's being asked on Reddit. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the best SEO is having a great brand, period. End of story. Like SEO can be an execution, but if you can do a good job actually understanding your customer needs and meeting that need, SEO sort of follows. Like, yes, there are some technical limitations. There's some things you can do to optimize and improve upon that using your data. But if you don't have that piece right, you're sort of screwed. Yeah. Like you can drive a ton of traffic, but if you're not driving conversions for your business, what's the point? That's the ROI is not there. The value is not there. You have to talk to that user.
Absolutely. Hey, is there a way that you sort that data? Like, is there Google Sheet templates that you've developed that you're willing to share publicly? Not
we do have an SEO templates post. In terms of like actually finding and sorting those, so we're using some machine learning scripts to help do that. They're out there.
Cool.
I think Lazarina Stoy has some content and shares like some of those versions of that. So I can't share specifically what we're doing or how we're doing it. And I don't know that we publicly share any stuff about that. But I would encourage people to explore that. So that can help you take keywords and sort of help cluster them. But you do need to experiment with that because I've definitely seen many. There's plenty of templates out there that just keyword clustering tool. And it's usually go get a bunch of keywords and then, maybe it's a data studio report and you just, copy and paste them in there and it just clusters them according to its own logic. And results may vary, just like you would expect. Sometimes I'm like, why would you group that with that? That makes no sense. How close is the keyword to it? Like how many characters match is sometimes a way to include those. And that's not always a very useful way to do it. So different models use different ways to do that. So I just encourage you to explore multiple each time and see what they come up with. And then the stage we're in right now with the machine learning and the AI, like you need human curation. Like, don't think you're going to run it through this script and magically everything's going to work. And then you've saved 20 hours and now, go forth and growth hack. That's not really how it works. The reality is you're going to try lots of different models. Most of them are going to fail. This one is going to work kind of okay. Then you're going to go through and manually curate. It'll save you time, ultimately, probably in most cases, not always. But if you find one that does work, then you're saving a bulk of that time. And then you can, instead of creating everything custom from scratch, whether it's your alt tags or your meta descriptions, right? You can have it make something for you and then you can go edit it manually, human curation. So it might take a 20-hour job down to like a 7 to 10 hour job. Like,
yeah, that's huge.
Think of the cost savings instead of thinking of it as a binary of it works or it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
What we have right now, the technology we have today is just not that good yet.
Yeah. So you mentioned something earlier. We were talking about search intent, and I want to talk about that and, how important it is or isn't in regards to keyword research. What are your thoughts on that?
It's incredibly important. Again, this is a thing you can accidentally get right because you understand your customers. But if you don't know that, if you're new to a business, if you're an SEO that's being hired into a business and you need to start to understand this, really starting to understand this nuance is hypercritical. Otherwise, you're just not going to rank for things. Again, going back to that analogy with the what is bone broth? If you just create a post that answers what is bone broth, you're not going to rank on. Even on page 100, right? Like you're not meeting the need. So Google's not going to show your content, period.
So does that mean then that when you take all this content, user intent is important, as you said. And then if you take this content, is it better to then, because if you just wrote one post, that's like, you can only say so much about what is bone broth. That's maybe like a 500 word. Maybe you want to stretch it out to 1,000 and it's going to be boring, but you're going to have to be pretty bone broth. Yeah, it would be hard. So does that mean that, in deciding how to take these keywords and you've done the keyword research, for instance, I can't believe that his name escapes me, but everybody knows who he is. He just sold Backlinko.
Brian Dean.
Yeah, thank you, Brian Dean. He would talk about skyscraper pages and if somebody has a list of the 38 ways to make something with bone broth, make an article that's like the 58 ways to make an article with bone broth. And is longer, is it formulating
longer,
it
always
into
better? No.
Longer? Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. That's what I was getting to. Thank you.
Right now, I feel like we're driving towards a finish line of often longer does help because it means you're being typically comprehensive. But then SEOs ruin everything. So what I mean by this is we take a thing and then we just beat it into the ground. Yeah. And we started with 500 and then we're like, Google feeds longer. This is why we have the classic example of the recipe posts where you have to read the 5,000 word essay about your grandma's on Sunday afternoons in order to get to the recipe. And it's infuriating.
Gosh, does that annoy me?
It's a terrible experience. And that's what fed the algorithm. So everyone kept doing it. And even after it stopped being as effective, people kept doing it because that's the wisdom. That's like what people were taught and people are just working the system. So they just make it longer and longer and longer. So I feel like we're a little bit still in that world, but maybe at some point soon, or in some places, we're starting to see a tipping point. So I would also encourage people to explore different mediums. So by this, I mean, a blog is not the answer to everything. Content is broader than a blog post, and not every blog post has to be 5,000 words. It's hilarious that I say that because that's mostly what we create. We also do video, but mostly we create very long, in-depth content. It does work, but it depends on your subject matter and the question you're answering. If you're answering a simple yes/no question, if you want a definition, that's not the right format. So you are already seeing the rise in like Reddit results when people ask a quick Q&A, or like the Stack Exchange, if people ask and answer, and answer the Quoras of the world, right? Yeah. So that is content. It's in a very different format. It's in the Q&A with the threading and all that jazz. But like that might be the better response if you have a short, quick question. So part of understanding search intent is what is the useful way to format this answer? Is it a video? Is it a blog post? Is it a social media thread? Is it a Q&A forum where you answer this? Like there are lots of different ways. Don't be limited by SEO blog posts.
Wow. So in other words, you could leverage Quora to answer that question.
Oh, yeah.
And funnel that traffic.
The best answer on Quora.
And get that
for
ranked.
that, you can get upvoted. You can work Quora as a system for being your expert to answer questions. And then you as a brand can get trust and you can start ranking for that term. You might even be able to link to your blog post within that Quora post that answers this in longer form. So, I mean, our blog posts tend to be long, like covering multiple intents, but then there's different smaller needs within that. And then you can point to this specific thing. Like here's the, you can use like an anchor tag or whatever, like the hash to jump to the right place in the article to be like, this is the part of this article that's relevant. There's broader context that you can read to if you want the broader context, but if you just want the quick answer, here it is, go.
Yeah. So using a table of contents for longer posts is probably critical, I would say. Just based on hearing you talk.
We have to. Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I have all of our content is unnaturally long. So yeah, we have a big, long table of contents, typically with 7, 8, 10 items sometimes to break things up.
And then you talk about how SEOs ruin everything they do to a certain degree. I know what you're saying. So just making a content long for the sake of making it long, if it's crap ass content, excuse my language, if it's crap content, it's not going to make a difference in the world. Like just making content long for the sake of making it long, or it doesn't.
And it's so easy to make it long now. Yeah. But that's why Google changes the finish line on almost all the time, because they have to, because we keep getting a thing and then we keep ruining it. So they have to keep exploring what's next. So a good SEO, a good brand team is really trying to stay at the forefront of that. Okay. Like, what is Google aiming for and how do we get better at that today so that by the time Google is good enough at that and they start rolling that out, we're already in a position to benefit from that.
Absolutely. Hey, can you share an example or a story, if you could, of how you adjusted your SEO strategy based on search intent? For instance, was there an example where you were doing keyword research for a client and the outcome of what they wanted was completely different from what the search data told you based on search intent? You have a story,
we can talk about that that multi-domain post. So this is actually how I recommend optimizing when you think you have an angle and you're going to go for it. So I believed strongly that people were looking for this and that they weren't getting the information that they needed on page 1 of these results. So I did my keyword research and I called it multi-domain SEO or domain SEO. Or I think multi-domain is the angle that I went with. And there was, 0 to 10 searches or 0 searches. I don't remember. There were like 2 or 3 little keywords with maybe a little bit of volume. And so you sort of follow your normal process of the keyword research. Like you try and validate. If you can't find the data, you kind of do it anyway and you just do your normal optimization. But you put it out there. And then the key is to return to it in 3 to 6 months later. And so you're sort of re-optimizing now that you have first-party data in Google Search Console about the performance of that post. So that's when we started to realize are people calling this multi-domain SEO or multiple domain SEO, or are they calling it domain SEO? Like domain strategy for SEO. So that was, a variation of we tried something, then you get data and you can go into Google Search Console and you're looking at an individual page's performance. You might look at impressions or clicks, and then you're organizing by rank. In Google Search Console, you can kind of click the headers to reorder things. And so do that and see what are you getting a lot of impressions on or a lot of clicks on, but that have a relatively low ranking. Those might be re-optimization opportunities. Should we pivot this post to be going after this broader keyword? Does it make sense? Is this a good keyword or not? Like certainly content ranks for stuff that's irrelevant. Ignore those. I don't care how high volume it is if it's not a good fit. But if it is a good fit and it's a bigger opportunity, I think that's a way where we now re-optimize things and bring in more of that domain SEO language. That's an optimization opportunity. So pulling at threads, trying things and coming back to it and reinventing it and being thoughtful about that. So quantity and length is not necessarily the way to get forward in the future. It might be today, especially in certain verticals where that isn't necessarily played out. Again, going back to this example of don't just do what your competitors are doing. Lots of things work because it's not overdone yet, or because it's not completely saturated. What often works is doing something different to stand out from what people are doing. And then that's what makes you stand out.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, so your questions about the long tail versus the bigger head terms, like I don't have a single play that we do. We don't always start in the long tail. We don't always start with the head terms. We look at what the opportunity is, and we look at how competitive it is, and we identify where the gaps are. What are other people not doing effectively? Are they tackling this stage of the customer funnel, but they're doing a crappy job here? Like, get your foot in the door somewhere. Execute that really well, and then start to diversify.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness,
doing,
that was a golden nugget.
Understanding your keyword research, but understanding the competitive atmosphere of your keyword research,
and looking for those gaps. Looking for those gaps you just mentioned. Hey, we'll have to have you back on
talking about things that you are really good at.
Yeah.
Match those things together.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back on the show to talk about that specifically, because that's something to just explore in and of itself.
Oh, I love competition research and discussing.
Yeah,
so let's do it.
What advice would you give someone who is just learning? Like, there may be someone who's just starting out in SEO and wants to learn how to do keyword research.
There's so much great content out there. Learning how to do these things. I would check out the Learning SEO Roadmap is a great resource. I would join the Slack communities of SEOs. If you can join Women in Tech SEO, that one's my favorite. Cool. Personal shout out there to that team. I love them. Traffic Think Tank is an awesome resource. You have to pay to get access, but it is a good one.
Traffic Think Tank?
Mm-hmm. It's another Slack community. Tofu is a great one. Top of the funnel. Tofu.
Top of the funnel.
They specifically talk about content marketing and also just Google things. Go on Twitter. SEO Twitter is a thing. It's a fascinating ecosystem, actually.
Right on. Those are some awesome tips right there. And I might add, if I could, just start your own website.
Just trying things. Yeah, it goes a long way. Start where you start. Like, that, it is a very effective means, and it has worked for me. I also understand that not everyone wants to work all the time in their off time. And I respect that. And there are good or find someone who's willing to spend time with you to help you learn. Like a mentor is a huge thing that can really help you grow.
Right on. Hey, how can our listeners connect with you online?
Well, you can find me, Tory Lynn Gray, on Twitter, gray.co on Twitter as well. And our website is thegray.company. Where the dot is literally the period. We're a dot company.
Okay. Thegray.company. Right on. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming you're on LinkedIn as well, right? You mentioned that.
I am. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Gray. Right on. We'll make sure we put those in the show notes and the links in the description.
You can just Google me. You'll find it.
Yeah,
that's how you find
absolutely.
me. Google Tory Gray, the Gray.company.
Just Tory Gray, TORYGRAY. Yep. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been a ton of fun.
No problem. Thank you.